It was a Friday night, and I had just gotten out of school and had to head straight to work. I worked a short 4-hour shift, and after work, my aunt, who's also my boss, tells me we're out of spoons for tomorrow's event. We sell ice cream, and these events pull in over 5,000 people, so yeah, we kinda need spoons. I said no problem. I'll grab some on my way home. The only store open that sells the heavy-duty kind is across town. I still wanted to meet up with my friends later, so I decided to take the faster route, even though it cuts through the sketchier outskirts of town. I live in one of those states where the weather can't make up its mind, and it had snowed the night before, but I figured the roads would be alright, even if they hadn't been plowed yet. The first 5 minutes went by smoothly. I haven't seen a single car or building, which wasn't too surprising, since it's pushing 9 p.m., and this part of town is pretty deserted unless you really need to be out there. Then something caught my eye. There's a man in the ditch. He looks about 5 feet 8 inches, wearing shorts, a t-shirt, and a backwards cap, walking through the snow like it's not 10 degrees outside. My first instinct is to pull over, but I'm on the phone with my mom, and she immediately tells me not to. She reminded me of a local case from a few years back, where a college girl was kidnapped and found wrapped in a rug. That was 2014. I hesitate for a second, but decide not to stop. I pass the guy going maybe 40, and the roads are still slick. Not even 500 feet later, a car I hadn't seen before suddenly turns on and pulls out of what looked like a field entrance and started following me. At first I thought maybe I just didn't notice a road while focusing on the guy in the ditch. But later I checked and yeah, there's no road there. Still, I'm not too alarmed. I've watched enough crime movies and read enough Reddit stories to keep cool. I start getting closer to town and make a few turns. I go left, they go left. I go right, they go right. I circle a roundabout and skip my exit just to see, and yep, they circle too. Now I'm starting to feel a little tense, but I tell myself maybe they're just heading to the same store. I got to a stop sign that wasn't in the nicest area either, and I made a turn without signaling. The car does the exact same thing. I should have gone straight to the police station, but I figured I was only 2 miles from a well-lit store, and if anything went down, at least there'd be people around. I kept driving and blew through a stop sign at a quiet intersection, and they did a quick stop and go, then caught right back up. 2 more turns and I'm at the store. I pulled into the parking lot and they followed. There's a gas station attached, so I pull in and pretend to get gas. The other car just stopped off to the side of the road and just sat there. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. They didn't move. Now I'm actually nervous. I'm just a kid. It's dark, and I'm alone on a bad side of town. I called my friends who were the ones I was supposed to meet up with and gave them the license plate number just in case, then crossed the street to the store. And yep, they pull in right behind me. I parked near the store entrance, and they parked 3 rows behind me a few spots over. It's almost closing time. Barely anyone's around. I turned my truck back on, moved to the opposite side of the lot, got out and bolted inside the store. I grabbed the spoons and took my time inside. Then I tried to call my friends to walk me back out, but my phone was dead. I look outside and now there's a white van parked right next to my driver's side door. It's running and looks empty, but the back windows are covered. Huge red flag. I ran to customer service and explained everything, but they didn't really take me seriously and just thought I was some kid being dramatic. At that point, I didn't see the original car, but there was no way I was stepping out with that van next to my truck. I waited 30 minutes, then finally, the van pulled forward from the side of the building, and the original car reappeared. I see them talking, then both vehicles drive off together. I waited another 10 minutes just to be sure, then I bolted outside, jumped in my truck, and sped to my friend's house. I pull into his garage, heart pounding. One of my friends looks down and asks why there's an orange mark on my tire. My stomach drops. That car must have marked me while I was inside. We checked the rest of the truck and found something in the bed. It was a metal pipe about 2 inches thick, maybe 18 inches long, and it was wrapped in duct tape half buried in snow. It wasn't mine. I was alone with no phone in a place I didn't know. I try to laugh it off, but now that everyone's asleep, I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I'd gone outside. Fast forward the next day, the police came and took the pipe, but they stated that they can't really do anything about it as nothing really happened. They said that they'll look into the license plate, but other than that, nothing much can happen as no crimes were committed. Comment below if you know the reason for the orange mark and metal pipe. About 7 years ago, I got an invitation to attend my cousin's dinner party. I had never seen my cousin or his family before, as we've only ever spoken on the phone, so I was surprised when his family suddenly invited me after all these years. The day arrived and I got ready to leave out. The invitation listed an address that didn't show up on my GPS, so I pulled out a map and pinned the location manually. After I confirmed everything, I got in my car and drove out. As I was driving, I started noticing just how far I was venturing from civilization. Trees upon trees, farms fading into more farms. Where am I going? Eventually, I stumbled across an address that looked sort of right. As I approached the house, something about it gave me a pause. It looked dull, dreary, almost forgotten, and leaves and branches wrapped around it, like nature was trying to swallow it whole. This can't be it, I said to myself. The moment I pulled into the rocky driveway, my aunt and uncle stepped outside to greet me, smiling, excited, and welcoming. I shook off the unease and walked in. I asked where my cousin was, and they said, "He went to run a few errands and he should be back later." We spent the next couple of hours chatting about my mother and the family. My aunt cooked an incredible homemade pot roast, and I polished off my plate in minutes. After dinner, we played an intense game of Uno, which was surprisingly fun but competitive. By the time we finished, it was almost dark and still no sign of my cousin. Regardless, I needed to leave as it was getting late, and I didn't want to be stuck in this strange, isolated place after nightfall. Since my GPS was useless out here, I asked my aunt and uncle the best way to get back to the highway. They gave me this confused look and said, "I thought you were staying the night." I explained that I couldn't as I had work in the morning and really couldn't afford to miss another day. "It's much better if you leave tomorrow morning," they said. "Trust me, you'll get lost." I brushed it off and told them not to worry as I was a solid navigator. I could get out of the Sahara Desert if I had to. Their faces changed. A little agitated now, they insisted strongly that I stay the night for my own sake. At that point, I was getting irritated and let out a sigh. "Fine, I'll stay the night, but I have to get up early." And just like that, their mood flipped again. Both of them were strangely ecstatic that I'd agreed, and they went off to get bed sheets and pillows. As soon as they were out of sight, I made a break for it as I bolted out the front door, jumped into my car, and tore out of that driveway like my life depended on it. It took some time, but I finally navigated my way out of that depressing place. I got home about an hour later than I expected. It was 11 p.m., and I didn't want to wake up my parents, so I climbed the fence and slipped in through the back door. That's when I noticed the kitchen light was on. When I took a step inside, my mom was sitting at the table looking impatient. "Where were you?" she asked. "I was at Aunt Deborah's, you knew this." Her expression didn't change, and that's when she asked, "Then why did she call saying you never arrived?" To this day, I still don't know who I visited. So, about 2 years ago, I was driving home late at night after a family reunion. It was around a 2-hour drive, and I didn't stay the night because I had to be back early for work the next morning. Most of the route was made up of narrow roads surrounded by thick trees and bushes, the kind that give off serious horror movie vibes. I'd been driving for about 45 minutes when I suddenly started feeling really tired. It was the type of tiredness that just hits you all at once. I realized I wasn't going to make it home safely in that condition, but I hadn't seen anywhere that looked safe enough to pull over and rest. Eventually, I gave in and did something kind of dumb. I pulled my car off the road and onto the grass, trying to hide it behind some bushes so it wouldn't be too visible to anyone driving by. The road wasn't completely empty, as I'd see another car every few minutes, but it still felt pretty isolated. I checked the clock and saw it was 11:22 p.m., then leaned my seat back and fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up to this light scratching sound. I looked at the clock and it was 11:50 p.m. The sound stopped almost right away, but I was still half asleep and way too tired to care, so I just went back to sleep. But then it happened again. This time when I opened my eyes, the clock said 12:40, and the sound wasn't stopping. It was this steady, creepy scratching noise. At first, I told myself it was probably just an animal sniffing around the car. But then I started wondering, why would it come back almost an hour later? I sat up and looked into my rearview mirror. I swear I caught a glimpse of something running back into the woods. It was quick, like a dark shape disappearing into the trees. My heart dropped. All I could think about was that old urban legend, the one about the hook-handed guy who scratches people's cars and waits for them to get out. I wasn't about to be that person, so I started the car immediately and got out of there fast. Not even a minute later, I came around a bend and saw a car parked off to the side. The driver's door was wide open, so I slowed down just a little to see if someone was inside, but the car was empty. I glanced in my rearview mirror again and didn't see anything. Then suddenly this guy came sprinting around the corner behind me. He was yelling at me, screaming things like, "Hey! Hey you, get out of your car, now!" With my heart racing, I floored the gas and got as far away as I could. Lucky for me, I never saw him again. I used to live in a pretty nice area with my husband and some family friends. We'd been there for a few years and nothing bad had ever really happened. It felt like a safe neighborhood. For context, I'm a very short white woman, and although I look fine on the outside, I'm considered disabled. My condition severely limits my activity, so defending myself physically has never been an option. This happened about a year before we moved. Around that time, I started seeing stories pop up on Facebook about traffickers targeting women and children at a local store, and the very store we lived right behind. The reports freaked me out, and I decided I wouldn't go there alone anymore. I kept seeing news articles about people being followed, grabbed, even kidnapped from that store, but I figured I'd be fine as long as my husband was with me. One afternoon, I was heading to work about 15 minutes away, out in the middle of nowhere. I worked the late shift at a call center surrounded by open fields, and I was usually one of the last people to leave at night. That day, I needed to stop for gas. I didn't like going anywhere without my husband, but I didn't have enough fuel to make it to work and back, so I had no choice. When I pulled into the station, I felt a little better seeing it was busy. I got out and started pumping gas when a big van pulled up beside me. A man stepped out, started pumping his gas, then walked around the pump and positioned himself between me and my car. He smiled and said, "Wow, your car is so clean. How do you get it so clean?" I was completely thrown off as my car was actually a mess covered in dirt and bugs. Then he said, "Why don't you show me how you get it so clean?" and reached out toward me. I jerked back instantly. Just then, another car pulled up behind me, and the man seemed startled. He walked back to his van. I quickly finished pumping, got into my car, locked the doors, and sped off. A few minutes later, I checked my mirror and the same van was right behind me, practically on my bumper. I could see the man laughing and talking to another guy inside. I told myself maybe they were just headed for the freeway, but when we passed the on-ramp, they stayed behind me. My heart was pounding. The only thing down this road was my work. I called my husband, but he didn't answer as he was at work too, so I just pressed the gas and headed for my job, checking my mirror every few seconds. When I finally reached the large parking lot, I pulled straight into a handicapped spot right in front of the doors and ran inside. Through the locked doors, I saw the van idling out front, the man looking visibly irritated. I went straight to a friend in my department who was ex-military and always armed. I was shaking as I told him what happened. That night when we closed, I peeked out the window before heading to my car. But it had moved by the time I told my friend. Now it was parked right behind my car. My friend pulled out his gun, walked me outside, and escorted me to his car. He drove me right up to my vehicle, then followed me home and stayed outside until I was safely inside. I noticed the van following us until we reached the freeway where it finally turned off. The next day on my way to work, I passed the gas station and just like before, the van pulled out and started following me. They tailed me all the way to the lot before turning away. This happened for about a week. They'd follow me to work, disappear, then reappear at closing time. My friend thought they were trying to figure out my schedule, waiting for the perfect time to grab me. He even offered me one of his guns just in case, but I refused, as I didn't want to risk legal trouble since it wasn't in my name. One night, I told my husband again about the van, and he suggested calling the police. I honestly don't know why I hadn't thought of it sooner. The next morning, before work, I called and explained everything. That day, right on cue, the van pulled out behind me. We were on that long, empty stretch of road when I spotted a car parked on the shoulder. I passed it, and then the van passed it as well, and suddenly, lights flashed. The police pulled the van over. Later, I found out both men inside had multiple warrants for rape and attempted kidnapping. In the back of the van, police found knives, rope, gloves, masks, chloroform, and other terrifying things. They told me I was likely their next target. Ironically, that day my friend wasn't at work as he was homesick. I'm so thankful I called the cops when I did. If I hadn't, I truly don't think I would have made it home. We've since moved to a less nice area, but I haven't noticed anyone creepy around, and now I always carry pepper spray when I go out. I must have been about 8 years old when this happened, and my sister was around 12 or 13. We lived in a small, run-down house we called the Shack, which was the place our mom moved us into after splitting up with our dad, as it was all she could afford. My sister and I shared a cramped bedroom, but the one saving grace of that house was the huge backyard, complete with an above-ground pool and a deck we practically lived on. A tall privacy fence surrounded the yard, and being the nosy kid I was, I often climbed the wooden planks to peek over at the neighbors. From there, I spotted the 2 little boys who lived kitty-corner to us as they went to my school. It quickly became a habit of mine to climb up and talk to them every day, but never climbing over, just high enough to hang on the fence and chat. They had an uncle named Randy, probably in his mid-20s to 30s, who was usually out back doing yard work. Over time, both my sister and I got used to chatting with him too. At the time, he seemed like a perfectly nice guy. Looking back now, the red flags were obvious. I remember one day he tossed a basketball accidentally over our fence. My sister and I offered to grab it, but he waved us off and insisted on getting it himself. Without hesitation, he vaulted the fence with ease. Back then, we thought nothing of it, but now I realize he was probably testing how quickly he could scale that barrier. One afternoon, in what seemed like casual conversation, my sister mentioned that our mom worked the night shift. That single piece of information was all he needed, as not long after, everything changed. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, so I was on the bottom. When I looked up, she was leaning against the wall with the phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. I asked what was wrong, but she brushed me off, told me everything was fine, and urged me to go back to sleep. So I did. It wasn't until the next morning that I learned the truth. While our mom was away at work, Randy had jumped the fence and tried to break into our house. He began by pounding on our bedroom window, demanding that my sister let him in. When she refused, he circled the house, banging on every window, rattling every door, yelling for her to open up. That's when she finally got out of bed, dialed 911, and tried to stay calm. Somehow, unbelievably, I had slept through the entire ordeal, even though, according to her, he was slamming on the window right beside my bed. By the time the cops arrived, Randy had already hopped back over the fence into his yard. They knocked on his door, but he denied everything. With no proof, the police said there was nothing they could do. The incident shook us to the core. Since our mom couldn't change her work schedule, she began sending us to stay at our dad's place at night. Years went by without further problems, and eventually we thought it was over. I stopped talking to the boys next door, and Randy faded into the background. But then it happened again. And yes, I slept through the entire thing a second time. By then, my sister was older and had invited several friends over for a sleepover. They were gathered in the living room near the sliding glass door that opened to the backyard. The door had vertical blinds, but one slat had broken weeks earlier, leaving a small gap. The girls were sitting around the couch playing board games when suddenly, one of them froze. Her voice was tight as she whispered, "Guys, don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your sliding glass door." All eyes turned toward the glass, and there he was, Randy, with his face pressed against the window, staring through the gap in the blinds, watching them in silence. Panic erupted. The girls screamed, and someone dialed 911. And just like before, Randy vaulted the fence and slipped back into his yard. When police arrived, they described his clothes, and sure enough, he answered the door wearing the exact same outfit. Yet again, he denied everything, and again, the cops claimed there wasn't enough evidence. That was it for us. We moved out shortly after and filed for a restraining order. Randy never showed up to court, so the judge automatically granted it, and we never saw him again. Years later, curiosity got the best of me, and I looked him up. Sure enough, he's now in prison on a slew of random charges. Nothing related to minors, surprisingly, but at least he's locked away where he belongs. A couple years ago, I was living in a fairly nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. Like any other day, I came home from work around 4:30 p.m., unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I dropped my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island as the heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, echoing through the apartment. I slipped into my usual routine, which was tackling a few errands around the house. Growing up in a small town had left me with one habit I hadn't shaken. I rarely locked the door during the day. My husband would be home soon, so I told myself, why bother? I've never once forgotten to lock a door since this day. Anyways, that day I walked into the bathroom and into my large walk-in closet to hang up the laundry I had started earlier that morning. That's when I heard my front door opening. I smiled, thinking my husband was home early. "I'm in here, love," I called out, cheerful and unsuspecting. But there was no reply, only silence. And in that silence came a creeping dread that something was wrong. My smile faded, but I told myself maybe he just hadn't heard me. I stepped out into the living room and froze. On the other side of the kitchen island stood a complete stranger. He was a man, maybe in his 50s, though the exact features blur in my memory. He just stood there, staring. No mask, no weapon, just watching me. For a second, I thought maybe he'd walked into the wrong apartment and would mutter an apology, but he didn't. He simply stared. I straightened my posture up, puffed out my chest, which was an unconvincing attempt at looking intimidating, and barked at him to get out. My voice was loud and sharp, but he ignored me completely. Instead, he calmly reached for my belongings, such as my phone, my keys, my wallet. Then he slid them into his pockets one by one, like he had all the time in the world. That's when the truth hit me. This man wasn't confused. He was dangerous. I lunged for the only thing left that could connect me to the outside world, which was my computer. It meant moving closer to him, but I figured I had just enough distance, about 12 to 15 feet, to grab it and run. I snatched it and sprinted toward the bathroom, heart hammering in my chest. It was the only place I could double lock myself in. The bathroom door slammed shut behind me and I twisted the lock. Seconds later, he was at the door, rattling the knob, pushing. I bolted into the closet, locking that door too, trembling as I opened my laptop. On Facebook Messenger, I fired off frantic messages to my husband, begging him to call 911. He replied within minutes that he was on the phone with dispatch and already on his way home. So I waited. The bathroom door creaked open, which means he was inside. The only thing that separates us now is one flimsy closet door. He twisted the knob, jiggled it, pressed against it, and I did nothing. I didn't scream, didn't cry out, didn't search for a weapon, though the laptop in my hands or half the things in that closet could have worked. I simply sat there, paralyzed, convinced I was about to die. Miraculously, the door held. I heard his angry footsteps retreat, then the crash of glass, the slam of cabinets, the sound of drawers being yanked open, contents flung everywhere. I sat frozen, tears streaming silently, too terrified to move. I messaged my mom, who was 15 hours away by car, and told her what was happening. I told her how much I loved her and begged her to tell my brothers I loved them too. She kept sending me messages, pleading with me to keep replying, and I did, between gasps of fear and resignation. Then his voice mumbling outside the closet door, garbled words I couldn't make out. I prayed the police would get there before my husband, terrified he'd walk into something horrific. Then all of a sudden, the front door opened again. This time, it was my husband. He shouted for me, but the intruder rushed towards him, and I burst out of the closet to see the two of them on the floor, with my husband pinning the man down. The stranger thrashed and muttered, sometimes yelling but never truly resisting. The scene spun around me in a dizzy blur. The police arrived about 25 agonizing minutes after the 911 call. It felt like an eternity. They recovered my things from his pockets, hauled him out, and took my statement. An officer told me I should always keep my door locked, and at the time it felt like blame. Later I realized it was experience speaking. He'd likely seen nights like this end far worse. In less than half an hour, the worst moment of my life had ended. But the fear stayed. The sense of violation stayed. The awareness stayed that if it could happen once, it could happen again. For a year, the nightmares kept me awake, even after my husband and I moved to a small Midwestern town with a safe apartment complex on the 3rd floor. One entrance only. Crime statistics nearly non-existent. Still, I couldn't sleep when my husband worked nights. I realized it wasn't just fear of the past, it was fear of being unprepared. 2 days ago, I went to my friend Courtney's wedding, and even now, I can't shake because of what happened. For context, I grew up in a very religious household and went to church every Sunday. Courtney is probably the only person from my old church that I still talk to. It all started at the reception. Courtney lit up when she saw me, but honestly, she was probably the only one happy I was there, judging by the stares from the rest of my old church crowd. I sat down at my table, idly scrolling through my phone, when a guy sat next to me. He introduced himself as Anthony, who was a friend of the groom. He explained that the seating chart had placed him at my table. He was cute, charming even, and we ended up talking for a long time. He didn't judge me for being an atheist, and he seemed genuinely interested in me. When the dancing started, they played Brown-Eyed Girl, and he asked me to dance. We ended up spending most of the night on the dance floor, laughing and talking, until he excused himself to go to the bathroom. A little while later, I headed to the bathroom too. When I came back, my purse was gone. I was sure I'd left it on the table, but figured maybe I had left it in my car. I went out to the parking lot, opened my car, and there it was, sitting on the center console. It was strange, but I brushed it off. It was late, I was tired, and I didn't think too hard about it. Back inside, I danced a bit more, but noticed Anthony was gone. When I asked the groom, he said Anthony had left because he wasn't feeling well. Soon after, I started feeling sick myself, so I said my goodbyes to Courtney and went to my car. I slid into the driver's seat, keys in the ignition, when I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A quick movement, like someone ducking down in the back. I was instantly scared. I pulled my keys out, turned around, and there he was. Anthony! Crouched down on my back seat. I screamed and bolted from the car with my heart pounding and with him chasing after me. I ran inside and found Courtney, who immediately told her husband. He walked me back to my car, but Anthony was gone. The car he came in with was nowhere to be seen. I left that night shaking, the sick feeling in my stomach refusing to go away. All I could think about was how easily he could have come home with me, and how I might not be alive right now if I hadn't looked back. Courtney was horrified and said she never imagined he'd do something like that. I've barely stepped outside since. The next few days became a blur, but I've learned more and it's terrifying. My address was on my ID and Anthony took photos of it. He and the groom weren't close friends, just acquaintances, but close enough for an invite. The groom tried to reach out afterward, but Anthony never replied. Instead, he showed up at my work, lurking in the parking lot. When he saw security, he ran, but not before leaving a note on my windshield that read, "I'm watching." Security has been alerted, but the whole situation makes my skin crawl. People from the wedding told me he'd been telling guests I was his girlfriend, and that he planned to propose to me. I'm working on filing a restraining order. For now, I'm staying with my aunt as he lives in my city and he knows where I live. If he was willing to hide in the back of my car, I don't even want to imagine what else he's capable of. I'm 22 years old now, and this happened about a year and a half ago when I had just moved into my first apartment. I was still getting settled in, and the door to my place automatically locks when it shuts. So one day, I stepped out to check the mail at the front of the complex while chatting on the phone with my boyfriend. When I got back inside, I sat on the bed flipping through the mail still on the call. At some point, I dropped my phone and it slid under the bed, so I got down on the floor and reached under to grab it. That's when I saw something that completely froze me. There was someone under my bed. I didn't scream, even though every part of me wanted to. My eyes went wide and I just stared. The person was lying perfectly still, with their back facing me and his head tucked into his chest. I couldn't see his face, and thankfully he didn't see me. Trying to stay calm while my brain was going 100 miles an hour, I picked up the phone and said as casually as I could, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and I'll call you back." I walked into the bathroom, which is right next to my bed, locked the door behind me, turned on the shower, and then climbed out the window. Luckily, I lived on the first floor. Once I was outside, I called the police and they told me to wait somewhere safe, but asked me to keep an eye on the building in case anyone left. So I crossed the street and crouched behind a car where I could see both the entry door and my bathroom window. I called my boyfriend right away and he got there just before the police showed up. I handed my keys to the officers and they went in. Not long after, 2 cops came out, holding this thin, exhausted-looking man. He looked out of it, eyes wide and wild, but he didn't fight or try to run. One of the officers had been standing with me the whole time trying to keep me calm, because honestly, I was shaking and crying. And that's when he told me something that still makes my stomach turn. That man had been standing right outside the bathroom door holding one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. Turns out he had slipped into my apartment while I was outside getting the mail and hid under my bed. He was a homeless man with severe mental health issues and was later taken to a psychiatric facility. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. The police told me the way I handled it probably saved my life. They said if I had screamed or panicked, it could have ended really badly. A woman went on a dinner date, but ending up eating human flesh. Jennifer matched with a guy on Tinder who seemed charming and good-looking. And after talking a bit, he invited her over to his place for dinner. She decided to go, thinking it seemed safe enough since he came off as normal and had planned everything out. When she arrived, his apartment was set up like something out of a romantic movie like Candles. dinner ready on the table and wine already poured, so she sat down and started eating, trying to enjoy the evening. Halfway through the meal, her stomach started to hurt and she felt uneasy, so she told him she wasn't feeling well, hoping he'd understand. But instead, he insisted she stay a little longer and told her to drink more wine and kept pushing her to eat more food. He didn't yell or act angry, just kept pressuring her in this strange, quiet way that made her feel more uncomfortable by the second. So she came up with an excuse and left. That night, she was sick for hours, throwing up again and again, and the next morning still feeling awful. She went to the doctor, who pumped her stomach and said it was probably food poisoning. They ran tests just to be sure, and Will let her know if anything serious came up. A few days later, the doctor called and told her to come in immediately. When she got there, she was shocked to see police cars outside, with officers waiting for her, and even a forensic team on site. That's when they told her the truth. When they tested the contents of her stomach, they found human meat. She gave them the address where the date happened, but it turned out to be a rented Airbnb under a fake name. And the phone number he gave her had already been disconnected. He had completely vanished. It took months, but the police eventually found the man and arrested him, though no one knows exactly what he was charged with or how many victims there might have been. All she knows is that she got out just in time, and the truth still haunts her to this day. In 2011, at Grand Valley State University in Michigan, Samantha Stites was just another college student. She was focused on her studies, her friends, and her future. She had no idea that a brief encounter on campus would mark the beginning of an ordeal that would haunt her for the next 11 years. That encounter was with a man named Christopher Thomas. He was several years older than her, socially awkward, and forgettable in nearly every way. But for him, meeting Samantha wasn't just a passing moment. It was the spark of a lifelong obsession. At first, Thomas's interest came across as awkward persistence. He asked her out. She politely declined. He asked again, and again. Samantha tried to brush him off, assuming he'd eventually move on like anyone else. But he didn't. Instead, the rejection seemed to fuel something darker inside him. He began sending her lengthy, emotionally charged messages. He called her a jelly bean, a pet name that made her skin crawl. He quoted the Bible, insisting their relationship was God's plan. His words carried the weight of obsession. "I want you to be part of my life," he told her. Samantha's friends noticed. Her roommate recalled feeling sorry for him and was nice to him. He took that and ran away with it. Another friend remembered Thomas showing up to her workplace uninvited, holding flowers, convinced he was her knight in shining armor. For Samantha, each interaction chipped away at her sense of safety. Every time she saw him, she was more and more scared. Then one day, Thomas approached her at a bus stop. After months of harassment, Samantha finally snapped. She turned to him and said, "I've told you I don't want to see you. I don't want flowers. I don't want messages. I don't want anything from you. Leave me alone." She thought her bluntness would put an end to it. But for Thomas, rejection wasn't closure. It was fuel. After graduating, Samantha returned to her hometown of Elk Rapids, which is a small, close-knit community where she thought she could rebuild her life. But Thomas followed her there. He even applied for the same internship she was starting. Samantha began to feel like she was living in a cage without walls. She told herself she couldn't be free of him. In 2014, terrified, she applied for a personal protection order. Judge Norman Hayes granted it and later admitted, he has never seen a stalking case as severe as this. He also stated that Thomas was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with her, and he's going to do something very severe. The judge granted Samantha the longest protection order of his career, which was 6 years. For a while, Samantha was able to breathe. She trained as a social worker. She bought a house. Her life began to look normal again. But in September 2020, as the order expired, she spotted Thomas again, watching her play football at her club. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw him. It was a chilling realization. The nightmare wasn't over. In July 2022, Samantha filed for another protection order. This time, it was denied. By then, Thomas had joined her gym, her football league, and positioned himself back in her orbit, but always just close enough to not break the law. Samantha's fear grew into certainty that he was planning something. Fast forward to October 7th, 2022. It was the early hours of the morning when Samantha heard a floorboard creak inside her home. With her heart pounding, she reached for the hatchet she kept hidden under her mattress. Then, out of nowhere, a man charged into her room and jumped on top of her. That's when she realized it was Thomas. He then began pressing his hands around her throat. She started screaming as she felt his hands around her throat and he began to choke her. It got tougher for her to breathe and she thought he was going to kill her. Terrified, she gasped and said, "If you want to me, just do it." But Thomas leaned down and said, "I just want to talk to you, but not here." He shoved a ball gag into her mouth, wrapped her head in black gorilla tape until it pulled at her hair, snapped handcuffs onto her wrists, and blindfolded her. Then he dragged her to her own car. And as the car pulled away from her home, Samantha thought that once they leave her house, the likelihood of her surviving goes down drastically. When the blindfold came off, Samantha was inside a storage unit. But it wasn't just a room. It was a custom-built torture chamber. The walls were padded. A dim light bulb flickered overhead. A bucket sat in the corner to serve as a toilet. A chain was bolted to the floor. He takes off her bandana, and she was shocked when she saw everything. So many thoughts popped into her head as this was a real horror story. Thomas calmly explained that he wanted them to stay there for 2 weeks. He gave her pajamas and handed her an old football jersey with her name on it, which was something he'd bought back when he first asked her out over a decade earlier. He told her his plan was to fake her death, then he would leave her paddleboard at a nearby lake, so people would believe she had drowned. At that point, Samantha's blood ran cold. She thought that there's no way they were just there to talk for 2 weeks. Hours passed and Samantha tried to reason with him. She begged him to let her go and promised she wouldn't go to the police. She tried to appeal to his emotions, telling him she could keep secrets as a social worker. But Thomas cut her off by saying, "What will convince me is if you sleep with me." Samantha froze as inside. Her mind raced. If I say no, will he do it anyway? Will he kill me? He holds the key to my life. She asked him directly, "If I sleep with you, you promise you'll let me go tonight?" He looked her in the eyes and shook her hand, as his integrity mattered to him. Samantha banked her life on that. "I felt myself go dead inside," she later said. "It was painful. I cried and I shook. I didn't want him to know I was disgusted and terrified. I didn't want him to get angry." When it was over, Thomas whispered, "That's all I've wanted for so long. You can't imagine how long I've wanted that. You're the person I'm supposed to marry." Samantha forced herself to stay calm. "I've held up my end of the bargain. You need to let me go." And astonishingly, he agreed. When police arrested Christopher Thomas, the sheer scope of his planning stunned investigators. Inside his rented storage unit, they found not only the soundproof chamber where Samantha had been held, but also rifles, a crossbow, and boxes of supplies. He had spent more than $5,000 over several months buying insulation, locks, restraints, and surveillance gear. He had even purchased Samantha's favorite food and a jersey with her name on the back, holding onto it for over a decade like some grotesque trophy. Detectives also discovered that he had installed a GPS tracker on her car months earlier, allowing him to monitor her every move. And then there was his attempt to erase his presence entirely. He coated his skin with hair removal cream to prevent leaving DNA, but he left it on too long, burning himself badly. His skin was still marked when police arrested him. When confronted, Thomas tried to downplay what he had done. He claimed Samantha had willingly participated in roleplay, but the evidence told a different story. On his phone, investigators uncovered disturbing images and videos, some taken without her knowledge, others documenting the chamber itself. His fantasy life was rehearsed and refined for years, and had finally broken into the real world. In court, the case against Thomas was overwhelming. Samantha's testimony, the physical evidence, the years of digital harassment, the storage unit, all of it painted a portrait of a man consumed by obsession. He was charged with kidnapping, torture, aggravated stalking, home invasion, and multiple counts of criminal sexual conduct. At his sentencing in 2024, the judge handed down a punishment of 40 to 60 years in prison. For Thomas, who had lived every day fixated on Samantha since 2011, it meant his fantasy life was effectively over. But the nightmare for Samantha did not end at the courthouse doors. In a phone call from prison to his mother, Thomas admitted that he thought about her every day for 12 years. It was a chilling reminder that, even behind bars, his obsession had not truly died. For Samantha, the knowledge that this man had devoted more than a decade of his life to planning her captivity is a weight she carries daily. She has said that the hardest part wasn't the night of the kidnapping, or even the hours chained inside the bunker. It was knowing that she had been right all along. For years, she told people he would never stop, and too many brushed her off as paranoid. Not until it was almost too late did anyone believe her. In In January of 1999, 21-year-old Shiori Ino seemed like any other university student in Saitama Prefecture, Japan. She was quiet, kind, focused on her studies, and devoted to her family. She wasn't chasing fame or money as she lived a modest life with her world revolving around school, home, and friends. Shiori was in every sense an ordinary young woman with hopes for a simple, happy future. It was at an amusement arcade near Omiya Station where her life took a turn. There she met Kazuhito Komatsu, who was a man who appeared charming and ambitious. He told her he was 23 years old and a young entrepreneur dealing in real estate, cars, and precious metals. He painted himself as successful, confident, and worldly. To Shiori, who was reserved and not accustomed to such bold attention, he seemed exciting, but almost everything he told her was a lie. Komatsu was actually 26, and he didn't run legitimate businesses at all. Together with his brother Takeshi, who was a firefighter, he operated a series of brothels disguised as massage parlors. Shiori didn't know the truth. To her, he seemed like someone with drive, someone impressive, so she agreed to see him again. At first, their outings were relatively ordinary. They went on a handful of dates, 4 or 5, nothing more. But very quickly, Komatsu's behavior shifted. He began presenting Shiori with luxury items like Louis Vuitton handbags, Gucci suits, and expensive jewelry. These weren't gifts given in moments of tenderness. Instead, Komatsu made a spectacle out of them, thrusting the items at her in public settings, forcing her to accept them while others looked on. If she hesitated, if she tried to refuse, he would erupt into anger, shouting at her until she complied. The gifts were not tokens of love, they were chains. Komatsu also began intruding into her private life. Though she had only given him her cell phone number, he began calling her at home. His sudden access unsettled her, but he dismissed her concerns and continued inserting himself deeper into her daily world. Then came the discovery that shattered any illusion she had left. While riding in his car one day, she found a credit card bearing his real name. Slowly, the truth began to creep in. His stories didn't add up, his age didn't match, and his business ventures were far murkier than he admitted. Shiori then tried to break things off. She attempted to cut ties before the relationship could go any further, but Komatsu was not a man who tolerated rejection. He threatened her that if she didn't continue seeing him, he warned her family would pay the price. He specifically mentioned her younger brother, who was a child still in elementary school. The message was chilling. Leave me, and I will hurt the people you love. By late March, Shiori's fear had escalated to the point where she confided in a close friend that she believed her life was in danger. Only days later, on March 30th, she sat down and wrote a will. At 21, while most of her peers were planning their careers, their trips, their next steps into adulthood, Shiori was putting her affairs in order. In June, she gathered her courage and met Komatsu at a cafe. There, she told him clearly that she would not see him again. She wanted nothing more to do with him. That should have been the end. Instead, it was the beginning of something much darker. Later that same day, Komatsu arrived at Shiori's family home with his brother Takeshi and a friend. They confronted Shiori and her mother, spinning elaborate lies about Shiori being liable for crimes that Komatsu himself had committed. They accused her of being entangled in embezzlement and claimed that unless she cooperated, there would be consequences. When Shiori's father returned from work, he was met with the same story and the same threats. Unmoved, he told the men to leave, instructing them to take back all the gifts Komatsu had forced upon his daughter. The men refused and eventually left, but not before making their intimidation clear. What they didn't realize was that Shiori had secretly recorded the entire confrontation. The next day, she and her family took the recording to the police in Ajeyo. For the first time, she thought there was undeniable evidence. Surely now the authorities would act. A younger officer seemed outraged at what he heard, but senior officers told her flatly that she had no case. They brushed her off, dismissing the threats as nothing more than a domestic spat. That same evening, the harassment escalated. The Ino family phone rang repeatedly, silent calls one after another. Then came a man identifying himself only as Tanaka. He demanded the return of the gifts. It was the start of a daily barrage of harassment that would continue for months. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Shiori, accompanied by her parents, went back to the police multiple times. Each time she was turned away. Officers told her she bore responsibility, that she had brought this on herself, by accepting Komatsu's gifts in the first place. Desperate, the family turned to a legal clinic. After just 15 minutes, the lawyer dismissed their concerns with a cruel remark. But she had a lot of things bought for her, right? Everywhere she turned for help, doors slammed in her face. On June 21st, Shiori finally boxed up all the gifts Komatsu had ever forced on her and returned them by courier. Over the summer of 1999, Shiori Ino's life became something out of a nightmare. What had started as harassment from an ex-boyfriend turned into a full-blown campaign of terror. Slanderous leaflets appeared in her neighborhood calling her names, accusing her father of corruption. Letters landed on her father's desk at work, humiliating him in front of colleagues. The phone rang endlessly with silent calls and neighbors whispered. Even friends pulled away. And through it all, Shiori and her family carried stacks of evidence such as the letters, the recordings, even photographs of suspicious cars parked outside their home straight to the police. But nothing happened. In fact, years later, it was revealed that some senior officers actively blocked the family's complaints. They didn't want the paperwork, and they didn't want the stain of an unsolved case on their record. So they did the easiest thing. They ignored her. Meanwhile, unseen by Shiori, men were quietly following her. They had her picture. They knew her daily routine, and they were charting her every move. For months, she lived under a shadow she could never quite name, begging for help and being told again and again there was nothing anyone could do. Then came October 26, 1999. Shiori left her home, riding her bicycle to the train station to head to class. As she parked her bike, a man approached her in broad daylight, stabbed her in the side and then again in the heart. She collapsed on the pavement as horrified bystanders looked on. Paramedics came and rushed her to Ohio Central General Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. She was only 21 years old. Only after her death did the horrifying truth come out. It turns out that her ex-boyfriend, Kazuhito Komatsu, had orchestrated the entire plot. While he deliberately built an alibi for himself in Okinawa, his brother Takeshi approached a former brothel manager named Yoshifumi Kubota with a 20 million yen offer to take Shiori's life. Kubota accepted and recruited two friends, Akira Kawakami and Yoshitaka Ito, to help carry it out. Together, they stalked Shiori for months, waiting for the perfect moment. The police, desperate to cover their own negligence, initially smeared Shiori in the press, portraying her as vain and materialistic. Tabloids ran with the story, tarnishing her reputation even in death. But one journalist, Kiyoshi Shimizu, refused to let the lies stand. He dug into the evidence, spoke to Shiori's family, and exposed the truth. Shiori had been systematically terrorized and abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect her. Arrests followed. Kubota, Kawakami, Ito, and Takeshi were all taken into custody. Komatsu himself fled north, but days later his body was found in a lake. He had taken his own life, leaving behind a note admitting he had always planned to die after ensuring a Shiori's murder. The trials brought long sentences, with Takeshi receiving life, Kubota getting 18 years, Kawakami and Ito having 15 each. But for Shiori's family, none of it felt like justice. Nothing could erase the months she had lived in terror, or the countless times she had begged for help, only to be turned away. With public outrage, it forced a change. A legislative hearing ripped into the police's handling of the case, where 6 officers were disciplined, and Japan passed its first anti-stalking law in 2000. It is a law that exists because of Shiori. Her father still speaks about her to this day, reminding people that Shiori did everything right. She recorded her abusers, she reported them, she begged for protection, and still she was left alone. The most haunting part of her story is that she saw it coming. At just 21, she wrote a will. She braced for an ending she couldn't stop. And in the end, she was silenced not only by her stalker's obsession, but by a system that refused to hear her cries. Shiori Ino is remembered today not just as a victim, but as a symbol of what happens when warnings go ignored. As a young woman who wanted nothing more than an ordinary life, destroyed by obsession, betrayal, and silence. For a bit of backstory, I used to work as a fetish model. It was something I did after college to help pay the bills and supplement my full-time job. It was a unique niche with a dedicated fan base, and I ended up with quite a few admirers. Many of them remained friends even after I stopped modeling. Most were respectful, never bringing up my past work because they knew I valued my privacy. I rarely had issues, but there was one guy who constantly sent me harassing messages. His tone was aggressive and demeaning, exactly the kind of attention I didn't want. He would sometimes switch and act kind only to turn creepy again. I blocked him and forgot about him. When he blew up my phone with calls and texts, I blocked him there too. When he started messaging me from different numbers, I changed mine. On social media, he made fake profiles to try and get at me. I ignored it and stopped adding anyone I didn't personally know. I thought he was just annoying and unbalanced, not a real threat. Years passed, complete silence. Then one day, a message from a girl asking to be my friend popped up. But I recognized the style immediately as he had a distinct way of writing, always demeaning and demanding with certain phrases. I ignored it. Recently, I started dipping my toe back into dating. I went on a few lame dates, nothing special. Then I matched with someone who seemed nice, friendly, and genuine. After chatting back and forth, we agreed to dinner and exchanged numbers. The date started off really well. He was considerate, conversation was easy, and dinner was pleasant. Afterward, we left the restaurant and walked back to his place. Even that felt nice. At his apartment, things got hot and heavy, and I was really enjoying myself until he leaned close and whispered, "Why did you make me wait for so long?" My stomach instantly flipped. I then asked him, "What do you mean by that?" "I moved from the East Coast for you." My stomach sank, and I started to shake. Then it was like a switch flipped in his head. The charming man from earlier disappeared, and he started spewing the exact words my online harasser used to send me. Like details from conversations I had forgotten, and he was angry that I didn't remember them. I froze, topless, realizing who he was. He kept glancing behind me, and that's when I noticed an open laptop. I'm certain he was recording. I forced myself to stay calm and told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. He grabbed me, demanding I swear this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. Smiling, nodding, I promised we'd go out again, all the while ready to fight if it came to that. Finally, he let me go to the bathroom to put my shirt back on. I walked to my car alone, then drove home in shocked silence. The fake name he gave unraveled quickly as I found his real Facebook page, confirming he was the same man who had been harassing me for years. I never looked him up before because I never took him seriously. Now I feel so stupid. I blocked the number, deleted my dating profile, and decided I wouldn't be going out again for a while. I'll change my number too because I know he'll keep trying. I'm going to the police so at least they'll have him on their radar. Thankfully, I never told him where I worked or lived. Now that I know his face, I can be cautious. I feel horrified and foolish for letting myself be vulnerable, but I'm wide awake now. Hi, my name is Tiff, and this is my horror story about a night I was home alone. I was 21 when it happened, and even now, more than a year later, I still can't shake it. My family had just moved to a small rural town, far quieter and more isolated than where we'd lived before. The new house was a sprawling ranch-style place with a basement. My parents left for a week to celebrate their anniversary with friends hours away, leaving me home alone. The first few days passed without trouble. I kept in touch with my parents over Facebook, as they were fine, having fun, and I felt secure enough. Every night before bed, I made sure all the doors were locked. I knew the house well by then. One front door, a sliding glass door at the back porch, and another that connected the garage and basement to the rest of the house. From my bedroom, you could look straight across the house to the kitchen, living room, dining area, and see the basement stairs. It was around 11 p.m. one night when the unease crept in. I was lying in bed with the glow of my computer lighting the room when this heavy sense of dread hit me. It felt like eyes were on me. The summer heat was brutal, so I had a big box fan lodged in my window, drawing in the night air. But with that feeling pressing down on me, I decided to pull it out, shut the window, lock it, and draw the curtain. That should have made me feel safer, but it didn't. Minutes later, I froze at the faint sound of a light, deliberate scratching. I told myself it had to be an animal. After all, we lived surrounded by trees with neighbors not too far away. Maybe it was a stray dog? The sound stopped, and I almost convinced myself I was right. Almost. Because then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps going down into the basement. Panic instantly gripped me. There was no phone in the house, and my own cell phone was broken. In order to leave, I'd have to walk right past the basement stairs. I considered the window, but my room was high off the ground, so that means jumping could lead to a sprained ankle or a broken bone. It was too risky if I needed to run. So I did the only thing I could. I eased open my bedroom door slowly and peeked out, hoping for a clear path to the front door. My eyes strained in the dark until they adjusted, but then I saw something. It was a shape. No, it was a man. Not standing, not climbing, but crawling up the basement stairs. He was crawling like some nightmare creature. I felt my stomach turn, and I slipped back into my room, locking the door as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it. My only option now was the window. As I fumbled with the screen, I heard the handle of my door jiggle. Then, in a sing-song voice, he whispered,
"I know you are in there."
Followed by a laugh that made my blood run cold. He threw himself against the door, rattling the hinges. I ripped the screen free and hurled myself out the window. Pain shot up my ankle as I landed wrong, but the adrenaline drove me forward. I sprinted barefoot across the yard, banging on my neighbor's door, slamming the bell, screaming for help. When I dared to look back at my house, he was there, standing in my window, waving at me. Eventually, my neighbors opened their door, pulled me inside, and called the police. When officers searched the house, they found the lock on the basement door had been picked. My bedroom door was nearly off its hinges, but the man was gone. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been moved. It was as if he'd come there only to watch. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but sometimes late at night, I still hear the phantom sound of scratching on my walls. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had taken off for the weekend to our place in Cape Cod. It's only about a 2-hour drive, so leaving me home alone for a few days was no big deal. My mom had left me pulled pork and pasta to heat up whenever I wanted, plus some cash in case I felt like ordering pizza. Everything was chill. That first night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I didn't crawl out of bed until well past 1 the next afternoon. I had plans to meet some friends for street hockey at 3, so I dragged myself into the shower, still half asleep. Here's the thing, I take long showers. Really long. And when my parents aren't home, I go all out. This one lasted about 45 minutes, mostly because I was on my phone scrolling through Reddit and Twitter. That's when I heard it. Our back door opened. The bathroom sits directly above that door, and it's an old, heavy one, so the sound of it opening and closing is distinct. I froze instantly as I was supposed to be alone. My ears strained for any follow-up noise. 2 minutes passed. Nothing. I told myself it was probably the wind. Or maybe my parents came home early. Turning off the shower, I wrapped a towel around myself and slowly started down the stairs. The staircase to the kitchen is narrow, enclosed by walls, and is tight enough that you can't see into the kitchen until you're almost at the bottom. Every step creaked in the silence, but I moved as quietly as I could, taking nearly a minute to descend 12 stairs. By the time I reached the second to last step, my heart was pounding. I reminded myself how ridiculous I was being, as if someone had come in, surely I'd have heard them moving. I chuckled under my breath, trying to shake off the nerves, and stepped into the kitchen. That's when I saw him. A man stood 2 feet away from me, perfectly still, staring directly into my eyes with a wide, unnatural smile. The thing that seared itself into my memory wasn't his face. It was his arms. They weren't at his sides like normal. They were twisted, rotated unnaturally outward and back. I swear my heart nearly stopped, and instinct took over before fear could. I instantly stepped forward and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping and pushing him towards the ground. As he stumbled back, I bolted up the stairs and my towel slipped off and landed somewhere in the kitchen. I slammed my bedroom door shut and shoved a chair under the knob, just like in the movies. My hands shook as I dialed 911, voice cracking as I told the operator what happened. And then, the light under my door disappeared. He was standing right outside. I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring the phone to my mouth. The shadow beneath the door shifted ever so slightly, like he was leaning in, listening. The operator kept asking, "Sir, are you there?" But I didn't dare make a sound. Eventually, the shadow pulled away. I heard the faint creak of footsteps retreating down the hall, and after minutes passed, I heard banging on the front door. It was the voices of the police that had arrived. I opened my bedroom door to find 2 officers standing there. The relief hit so hard I nearly cried. To this day, my parents haven't left me home alone again. I lock every door and window before bed. Sometimes I still dream about him. That twisted posture, that smile. The police never found him, no matter how many sketches or lineups we went through. And the thought that he might still be out there and that maybe one night I'll look outside and see him, standing under a street lamp, smiling, makes my skin crawl. This is the story of when I found something horrible in the woods. I was 15 years old at the time, and was camping out in the middle of nowhere with my family and part of my extended family like my aunt, uncle, and cousins. These were all people we knew fairly well from previous camping trips, so it was considered normal to hit it off with them from the start and act like we've known each other forever within the hour. My parents trusted me a lot, and I liked my fun, but I liked getting home in time for dinner equally as much. So when I was gone most of the day with other people from the camp, they didn't think much of it. The only rule was that I had to be back at the RV to eat dinner, and before 8:30 p.m. in the evening. So picture a group of 6 teenagers between 15 to 16 years old, out in the middle of the woods with no adult supervision for the vast majority of the day. Just a recipe for success right there. But this particular day we found a neat little deer trail we hadn't found in the 2 years we'd been there before. On second thought, it didn't really seem like a deer trail. It snaked through a really thick part of the underbrush, maybe a foot of clear ground. It's a really hard thing to pick out of the brush unless you're either really looking or know where it is. It was promptly explored and marked with a broken branch outside of the entrance and quickly forgotten. Except I remembered this special little tunnel. That night while we were all eating dinner, one of the adults proposed that we played manhunt out in the woods at night. Not everyone was totally on board with this idea, but in the grand scheme of the plan, they came around. Everyone got a flashlight, and everyone was assigned to a team. For those of you who aren't sure what manhunt is, basically everyone playing is given a flashlight, and they are divided into 2 groups. It's basically like a glorified flashlight tag, but there's a catch. As you catch people, you have to correctly identify who they are, and if you can, they join forces with the hunters. The last man standing gets a candy bar or something, whatever is being offered as a prize. This is how we played it. For the first round, I got lumped in with the runners who are the ones getting chased by the hunters. We get a 5-minute head start to run, climb a tree, or whatever the hell we want to do to evade the hunters. Usually I'm the one up in the tree, but that never really worked out as being the winning spot. So to try and score a win for once, I decided to play the cat and use one surefire method of escape. And the hiding spot was that same spot I described earlier. It took most of the head start time to find the damn thing, because it was so well hidden and out of the way. As I passed hiding spots, I heard hushed, smothered whispering between siblings who were questioning my actions. It should be noted that I have bat hearing, as my ears are possibly my greatest asset in this game. But when I'm just reaching the destination, I hear the short blast of the air horn announcing that the 5 minutes are up. I dove into this minute little path in the undergrowth, shuffling on my hands and knees until I'm about halfway in. I was crouching down like some huge malformed quail. The hunters are doing an initial sweep through the trails, looking for obvious hiders and people caught out trying to change spots. When they finally reach me, they reach the dead end and go straight back. I try to readjust myself and crawl further down the tunnel. I honestly don't know how it happened, but I found an even more hidden path within that one, and accidentally dragged my stupid body down the rabbit hole. Except, instead of ending in a dead end, this one ended in a slight hollow. After I gathered my senses, I gazed down and saw something. It was a body. It was a younger looking woman, who was naked and covered in lacerations and stab wounds in the fetal position. Her glassy glazed eyes seemed to look straight through me. I was too scared to scream, and I froze there while dark burgundy stains formed on my jeans. And then I heard someone else coming along that path. I let out a short, trembling whimper and started moving. Whoever was on the path stopped, and then eagerly started moving forward again. I could hear their panting. It was the uneven breaths of a man who was getting closer and closer to me by the second. By some wondrous, beautiful miracle, he missed the path leading to the brushy hollow. I heard him moving down past the entrance, dragging something clunky and awkward behind him. I heard clinking noises and the occasional effort to silence the small, sharp noises. I heard a low curse somewhere towards the end of the tunnel, and I blasted out of the undergrowth tunnel like a bullet forcing its way out a barrel. Cracks, crashes, and obnoxious rustling was all around me as I heard the man sharply intake a breath and begin to move towards me. The hoarse, deep panting was getting closer and closer to me, which is a testament to how I was too slow at exiting. Somehow I exploded out of the entrance, got onto my wobbly, half-asleep legs, and started booking it down the trail. The unknown pursuer was close behind me for a bit, but it seemed like he was too exhausted to chase me at the same speed for long. I know everyone loves to rip on the fact that people always trip in horror movies, but in all honesty, tripping is something I am amazed I didn't do. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached the main trail running back to the camp, and and sprinted down screaming bloody murder. Reaching the camp was easy, but trying to explain why I woke up half the people in the camp and bolted out of the woods at breakneck speed was harder. When I finally choked the words out to explain, I remember a profound, insidious silence throughout the group of adults waiting at the mouth of the trail. I really don't remember a whole lot from that point on. I know the cops were called, and my mother and aunt ran shrieking and wailing along the trail, calling for the other kids to come back to safety. They rounded everyone up in 30 seconds flat and barreled back into the camp. The police came and found a man out in the woods, creeping along the trail clutching a knife. They found a black garbage bag with a plethora of sharp instruments, and a saw was found abandoned on the trail with some speckled and smeared with dried blood. To this day, I don't think there's really any getting over it. I still have nightmares sometimes of the man chasing me, breathing heavily down the back of my neck trying to catch me. And sometimes he succeeds. One late at night, I was heading home, so I got on the subway. The car I was in was almost empty with just a few people scattered around. I sat down and I started browsing through my phone. All of a sudden, something felt a little off. Sitting directly across from me was a woman between two older men, and the second I sat down, I noticed she was staring at me, not casually watching me or glancing around, just full-on staring like she was locked in. I tried to brush it off at first by looking away, focusing on my phone, but that uneasy feeling stuck with me. I glanced up again, and sure enough, her eyes were still locked onto mine, completely unblinking. The longer it went on, the more it started to get to me. I shifted in my seat and tried to act like I didn't notice, but the intensity of her stare was hard to ignore. Then the train stopped and a man stepped in. He was tall and wearing a trench coat. Without saying anything, he sat down right next to me, which made me even more on edge. But the strange part was that the woman didn't react at all. She just kept staring straight at me like he wasn't even there. And the two old men beside her didn't move either. It was like they were frozen. My heart was starting to race, but I kept pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to look paranoid, but something about this entire situation felt completely wrong. I'd glance up every few seconds just to check, hoping maybe she'd finally look away or blink or do anything else. But her expression didn't change one bit. As the train slowed down for the next stop, the man next to me suddenly stood up. Before I could say anything, he grabbed my arm tightly and pulled me out of my seat. I barely had time to react as he dragged me off the train, and a moment later the doors closed behind us and the subway pulled away. I was so stunned. I started yelling at him, asking what the hell he thought he was doing. I told him to let me go and that I don't even know him. My voice echoed in the empty platform and I felt my panic growing. Then he turned to me, looked me straight in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Calm down. I didn't mean to scare you, but I had to get you off that train." I was so confused and I asked him why. Then he said, "The woman across from you was dead. The two men beside her were holding her up to make it look like she was still alive." I was so speechless, I didn't even move. A few years back, I was renting this little house in Northern California, just outside the suburbs. One evening in the middle of winter, I got home from work after a long shift with some overtime. It was already dark and the sky was full of clouds, so when I pulled into the driveway, the only light that was there was from my headlights and the small porch light. I stepped out of the car and caught this faint smell of cigarette smoke, which was weird because I'd never smelled that around the house before and I didn't smoke. I looked around but didn't see anyone, so I shrugged it off and went inside. I was exhausted, not even 7 yet, but I figured I'd shower and call it a night. I crawled into bed and fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up suddenly thinking I heard something inside the house. At first, I wasn't too alarmed because one of my friends would sometimes drop by to use the shower after work before heading to his night classes. I'd even given him a spare key just in case I wasn't home, but he always texted first and I didn't remember hearing my phone go off. So I reached over to check it. This was back when phones didn't auto-dim in the dark, and my screen lit up so bright it practically blinded me. I squinted and saw it was a little past 9, but I couldn't really tell if there were any texts. I set it down and called out my friend's name. No response. A couple seconds later, I heard heavy footsteps suddenly take off running downstairs. That's when the panic kicked in. I jumped out of bed and ran straight to the closet. I could already hear whoever it was racing up the stairs by the time I was getting the door open. Upstairs there were 3 rooms, my bedroom, a spare room on the opposite side, and a bathroom at the end of the hall. Both bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard the guy thunder down the hallway past my door and straight into the bathroom. Thank God for that. It gave me just enough time to pull down the attic access in the closet and start climbing up. I was halfway in when I heard him come back out of the bathroom. My feet had just disappeared into the attic when my bedroom door slammed open. I immediately froze. He ran into the room, stopped for a second, then bolted to the spare room. That room just had some storage boxes, a few weights, and a table where I painted miniatures. I guess he thought someone might be hiding in there, but didn't find anything. So he rushed back into my room and flipped the light on. Then a second later, I heard the closet door fly open. I was crouched just above the attic opening, close enough that if he tried climbing up, I could try to kick him back. From where I was, I could only see from about his knees down. He was wearing a dirty, frayed blue jeans and old, worn work boots. He stood there for a few seconds, then walked away. And that's when I heard this loud crash and a scream. Not just any scream. It was this furious, frustrated scream that chilled me. It sounded just like my stepdad when he used to lose his temper. The same kind of rage that eventually landed him in a mental hospital. Then the guy tore back down the stairs. I heard things being tossed around. Furniture crashing, just chaos. I stayed completely still in the attic, afraid to even breathe. My phone was still on the bed as I hadn't grabbed it when I ran. I had no idea how long he was going to be down there, so after a while the noise stopped, and I started counting slowly all the way to 1,000. Then I finally climbed back down. The first thing I saw was that my bed was flipped completely over. That must have been the loud noise I heard right after he looked in the closet. I searched around but couldn't find my phone, so I grabbed the landline next to the bed and called the police. I stayed upstairs until I heard them shout from the first floor. Downstairs was a wreck. Chairs knocked over, the couch flipped, books and decorations scattered everywhere. The kitchen was worse. Every cupboard was open, food all over the floor. But oddly enough, the only thing missing was one kitchen knife from the wooden block. The cops did a full sweep of the place and found the side door had been forced open, probably with a crowbar. Out by the fence, they found a few cigarette butts, some foil, and an empty pen tube. One of the officers said that stuff's usually used by people smoking meth. He figured the guy had been watching the house for a while, probably saw me come home, and maybe even heard me pull in. That cigarette smell I caught earlier was from him. They gathered what they could and told me I should go stay with friends or family and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I didn't leave, though. Instead, I blocked the door with a shelf and stayed up the rest of the night, cleaning up the mess. Every so often, I'd shine a flashlight along the fence line, hoping not to see anything, and luckily I didn't. The next day, I got the door fixed, had motion lights installed along the back and sides of the house, and even ran a phone line up to the attic so I'd never be up there again without a way to call for help. I ended up living in that house for 3 more years, and nothing like that ever happened again. I work summers as a camp counselor up in the northern stretches of Ontario, Canada. On this particular night, I was out with a group of 10-year-old boys for a routine overnight trip on the same lake our camp is based around. Pretty standard stuff as we canoed out to our site, set up camp, and let the kids run wild swimming, building forts and playing games while me and my co-counselor Mike took turns keeping an eye on them. We cooked over the fire, shared stories, roasted s'mores, the classic Canadian camping vibes. By around 9:30 p.m., I told the kids to pack it in for the night. Their tents were tucked a short walk away from the lake, but still within sight of our fire pit. With the kids down for the night, Mike and I hung back by the water, quietly chatting and smoking, just soaking in the stillness before calling it ourselves. What happened next still gives me chills. We were both staring out into the black, glassy lake when we noticed a faint light slowly moving toward us, hovering just above the water. At first, we were just speculating that maybe it was a boater or someone night fishing, but as it got closer, we realized it was a small light mounted on the front of a kayak, with someone paddling toward us. Now, part of our counselor training is learning how to handle strangers when you're responsible for a group of kids on public land, so I was ready to give the usual speech about how we were camping with an organized group, and kindly asked them to move along. But as the kayak drifted closer and the figure came into view, my gut dropped. It was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with long, stringy gray hair trailing into the lake. Her face sunken and leathery like she'd been out in the elements far too long. Her eyes looked almost lifeless beneath her wrinkles, and when she finally spoke, she revealed a mouth mostly devoid of teeth. I froze. She looked right at me and asked, "Are all your children safe in bed?" Then pointed toward the tents. I stammered out that they were fine and told her she needed to leave. She just gave a strange, knowing smile and said, "That's good," just as expected for this time, then silently turned her kayak and paddled off into the darkness like some ghostly vision. Mike and I just stood there, rattled to our core. We checked on the kids immediately, then grabbed our hunting knives and stayed by the fire, uneasy and alert, but it didn't stop there. Maybe half an hour later, I got a text from a female counselor leading a different group across the lake. She wrote something like, "Hey Sean, quit messing with us. This isn't funny, the kids are getting scared." My heart skipped. I called her immediately and told her what we had just seen, and that it wasn't a prank. That's when she told me one of her campers had opened his tent to pee and saw a woman with long hair standing near the shoreline, arms stretched out toward them. This happened about 4 years ago when my boyfriend and I were still pretty new in our relationship. My sister had suggested this snorkeling spot as a fun getaway. It was this flooded quarry turned campground, known for its crystal clear water and cool diving attractions, like a sunken helicopter and a school bus. So we decided to make it a camping trip, just the two of us. When we arrived to check in, we both got this strange, unsettling feeling about the place, but we didn't mention it to each other until after we were already home. At first, everything seemed great. We were snorkeling in the shallow part of the quarry, and even though the drop-off into the deep black water gave me an eerie feeling, I was having fun. The water was 65 feet deep, and as soon as you passed the shallow edge, it just plummeted into complete darkness. That's actually when I realized I might be terrified of open water. There was something deeply disturbing about how still the lake was, probably because being a quarry meant there was no current. Later that night, we were winding down at our campsite, which was in this grassy patch, down a small hill from the road surrounded by woods. Across the field was another campsite that looked like it had been lived in for a while, but the neighbors weren't there yet. We were roasting hot dogs over the fire when they finally returned, but not long after, they went straight to bed. Maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, things started to get strange. My boyfriend and I were chatting quietly when we both noticed this figure standing up the hill, watching us. Because of the firelight casting shadows, we couldn't see his face or any details, but we both knew he was staring right at us, half hidden behind our neighbor's truck. He just stood there silently for what felt like forever before slowly walking down the road. We watched him move through the trees that bordered both our campsite and the road. Each time he passed behind a tree, I braced myself for when he would appear again, on the other side of the other tree, then another, and another. But then he didn't come out. I stared, waiting, but he was just gone. I could tell my boyfriend was trying to brush it off, and I went along with it, convincing myself it was nothing. We even ended up walking back to the quarry later that night. The stars reflecting on the still water were beautiful, but that black abyss was unnerving. Eventually, we got back to our tent, smoked a joint, and tried to relax. I started to feel uneasy, and I tried to blame it on the weed, but then after a long silence, my boyfriend whispered, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I nervously laughed and asked why he'd say that, but I was already scared. He wanted to step outside the tent, so we stood near my car, and then I had this stupid idea that we'd be safer standing in the middle of the open field, thinking if someone approached us, at least we'd see them coming. We were barely in the field when we noticed a dark figure again, standing maybe 20 yards away. It looked just like the one from earlier, and he was walking the same direction as us. We changed direction, and so did he. We said if he matched us again, we'd make a run for it. When he did, we sprinted straight to the car. I watched him from the seat, and he just stood there for a moment, then slowly walked back into the trees while staring at us the whole time. My boyfriend said we should leave, and I agreed, but our gear was still outside, so we quietly packed up, trying not to scare each other more. And then came the weirdest part. My headlights wouldn't work, and there was this strange fog over the windshield that didn't clear up no matter what we did. We had to drive through those dark woods with only our low beams and that fog blurring everything, barely able to see the road. But the second we got to a gas station, the fog vanished like it had never been there. We then went back on the road and made it home around 1 a.m. The next day, I told my dad what happened, and he just looked at me and said he was glad we got out when we did, or we might have been murdered. Later, I found out 2 people had actually died there while snorkeling. My boyfriend and I still talk about it sometimes, and we go back and forth between thinking it was just some crazy guy or something worse. My fiance and I was racially attacked. My fiance and I were on the second night of a short camping trip at a popular campground about 30 minutes from where we live. For context, he's black, and we live in a mostly white, very conservative, and often racist area, which becomes important later. The first night, we heard strange noises in the woods around us. The site to our right was taken, but the one to our left was empty. We'd camped in this exact spot the year before, so we were familiar with the area and the kinds of animals that might be lurking. That night, we heard something large moving around near the tent. Probably a deer, we thought, so we shrugged it off and went to sleep. The next day, we spent the day with my family at a battlefield in a nearby town, which was a surprise my fiancé had planned because he was going to propose to me. We stayed with them until around 6 in the evening before heading back to our site. And that's when we knew something was off. Someone had clearly been in our tent. The blankets were tossed around, clothes were on the floor, my backpack had been messed with, and my underwear was missing. But being naive 19-year-olds, we convinced ourselves it was fine, since nothing major had been taken and figured the person wouldn't come back. That night, we lit a fire, roasted hot dogs and s'mores, smoked a few cigarettes, and celebrated getting engaged. Around 9:30 p.m., that we put out the fire and crawled into the tent to celebrate a little more privately. Soon after, the noises returned. This time, we really listened and could clearly make out footsteps and then, even more disturbing, a man whispering. We looked at each other in wide-eyed panic and realized there wasn't just one person. There were two. Both whispering, both moving around our tent. Without saying it outright, we knew what we had to do. My fiancé said he had to use the bathroom, and I nodded. The bathrooms were up the hill, and most people from the lower campsites drove up. As we scrambled to get dressed, he turned on the light and put on his binder. That's when we heard a voice, right outside the tent. "What are you doing?" The way he said it sent ice down my spine, like he was amused, like he had been watching us the whole time. And in that moment, something just snapped. We grabbed what we could, and my fiancé clutched his keys and his knife, yanked open the tent, pulled me up, and we ran like hell for the car. I could hear the footsteps behind us at first, then veering off to another campsite. At the bathroom, we tried to calm down and figure out what to do. Do we sleep in the car? Drive to town? Finally, we decided to go back and pack up fast. By now, it was midnight. We ripped up everything, tent and all, shoved it in the car, grabbed our folding chairs, and as I hopped in, I quickly ran back to yank off the nameplate from the post, as it had my full name. As we pulled away, headlights sweeping over the trees, I saw them. It was two tall white men stepping out from the woods, right where our tent had been. I recognized them as they'd been circling our campsite in a truck earlier, glaring at us and whispering to each other. One wore camo hunting gear, while the other wore a Confederate flag tank top, and both carried large hunting knives, unsheathed and ready. One of them started walking towards our car almost in a jog, until the other stopped him. I looked straight at the man in camo and he smiled, slow and cruel, then shook his head like we'd just cheated death. We didn't go home the normal way. We took back roads, weird turns, anything to avoid being followed, and called my dad on the way to let him know we were coming. When we got there, we told him everything and he just shrugged it off like we were being paranoid. So I never told anyone else until now. But I know what I saw and I know what that night was. My fiancé was the only non-white person at any of those campsites. It wasn't a coincidence that the two men who wore Confederate flags and had one on their truck were the same ones stalking us, whispering outside our tent, and waiting with knives. It still makes me shiver to think how close we were to getting seriously hurt or worse, and how lucky we were that we ran when we did. To start the story, there are two sisters. Hannah, who's 12 years old, and Alex, who's 8. They live on the north side of Virginia with their mom. It was just a typical cold September morning when their mom had to leave early for work. Before heading out, she asked the neighbor's 16-year-old daughter, Lylan, if she could babysit Hannah and Alex for the day. Lylan agreed, and the mom offered to pay her for helping out. As soon as the mom left, Lylan took the girls out to the front yard to play soccer. They played for about 2 hours, laughing and running around. But while they were playing, Lylan noticed an older man across the street, probably in his late 60s, standing by his truck and watching them. She tried to brush it off, but something felt off, so she told the girls, Hey, why don't we go inside, grab a snack, and watch some TV? They all headed back inside. Once the girls were settled, Lylan peeked through the peephole in the front door. The man and his truck were gone. Around 3 p.m., Lylan got a call from the girl's mom. She was checking in and letting her know she might be working late. She promised to pay Lylan extra. "It's no trouble at all, Mrs. Capman. Hannah and Alex are a delight to watch," Lylan told her. "Thanks, sweetie. You're a doll. I'll be home before you know it." "No worries. See you soon," Lylan said, hanging up. Hannah and Alex were watching a movie in the living room while Lylan sat nearby reading a mystery novel. Suddenly, the house phone rang. Hannah jumped up and answered it, assuming it was her mom. "Hello," Hannah said. "Oh, hello. Is this Mrs. Thompson?" a man asked. Leland quickly walked over, took the phone from Hannah, and spoke calmly but firmly. "Who is this? Why are you calling?" "Is this Mrs. Thompson?" The voice repeated. "No, I'm sorry, sir. You have the wrong number." "Take care," Lylan said, then hung up. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Lylan picked it up, now a little uneasy. "Hello? Hello, is Mrs. Thompson living there?" "No, there isn't. Stop calling here," Lylan said, starting to get nervous. She considered calling the police, but didn't want to scare the girls over what could just be a wrong number. Another 10 minutes passed, and the phone rang again. "Hello? Who is this?" Lylan answered. "Hello, is there a Mrs. Thompson here?" Her throat tightened. "Stop calling here," she snapped and slammed the phone down. Then came a loud knock at the door. Hannah and Alex turned to look. "Who's that?" Alex asked. Lylan walked to the door cautiously and motioned for the girls to be quiet. A man's voice called out from the other side. "I know you're inside. I can hear you breathing." Who are you? What do you want?" Lylan shouted, her voice tense. She motioned for the girls to hide behind the couch and turn off the TV. "I just want to talk to Mrs. Thompson. I know she's in there." "Damn it, let me in," the voice shouted. Lylan peeked through the peephole and her eyes widened in horror. It was the same old man from earlier, the one who had been watching them outside. "Sir, please leave the property or I'm calling the police." "Not until you let me in! Now!" the man shouted, then started slamming his fists against the door. The girls screamed. Lilan ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife and the phone, then yelled for the girls to run upstairs to their mom's bedroom. The man kept pounding on the door as they all rushed upstairs and locked themselves inside the bathroom. Alex cried, clinging to Hannah, who was trying not to cry herself. "Lylan? Who is that man?" Hannah asked. "I don't know," Lylan said, trying to stay calm. "But everything's going to be okay. I'm calling the police." Downstairs, the man was screaming and smashing things. Then they heard glass shatter. Lylan didn't wait. She dialed 911, and the conversation went like this. "911, what's your emergency? Please send someone quick. There's an intruder in the house. Please help." "Okay, ma'am, calm down. What's your name and location?" "My name is Lylan Jameson. I'm babysitting my neighbor's daughters, and a man broke in. Please send help. Are you and the girls in a safe place?" "Yes, we're locked in the master bathroom upstairs." Suddenly, a loud crash sounded from downstairs, then a gunshot. The girls screamed, and Lylan held their trembling hands. "Listen to me," the dispatcher said. "We've tracked your location. Police are on the way, and they'll be there in 5 minutes. Don't move." "Okay, please hurry," Lylan cried. Moments later, they heard sirens.
"This is the police! We have the house surrounded. Come out with your hands up!"
came a voice from a loudspeaker outside. At the same time, 2 cars pulled into the driveway, with one was Mrs. Capman, panicked. The other was Lylan's mom, trying to calm her down. 3 officers rushed into the house. 2 tackled the old man, tasing and handcuffing him, while a 3rd ran upstairs. "Police! Lilan! Hannah! Alex!" he called out. "We're here!" Lilan shouted from the bathroom. She opened the door and stepped out with the girls behind her. The officer then led them outside. The girls screamed, running into their mother's arms. "Oh my God, Lylan!" her mom cried out, hugging her tightly. The old man was dragged out by officers and placed in a squad car. It turned out he was mentally unstable. Mrs. Capman turned to Lylan, teary-eyed. "Lylan, I can't thank you enough. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." "It's okay, Mrs. Capman. I'm just glad we're all safe." Mrs. Capman pulled out her wallet. "Oh, you don't have to pay me." "I want to," she said firmly. "With everything you did to protect my girls, please, I insist." She handed Leland $200 with a little extra. Lylan gave the money to her mom and aunt standing nearby. "Lylan, can you stay with us tonight?" Alex asked. Leland turned to Mrs. Capman. "Is that okay?" She nodded. Mrs. Capman, can I talk to you for a second? Lylon asked. They stepped aside. I didn't want to scare the girls more, Lylon said quietly. But the man kept asking for someone named Mrs. Thompson. I don't know who that is. It's all right, Lylon. You don't need to say more. I'll talk to the police. For now, just relax and spend time with the girls. Okay, thank you. As Lylon looked back at the house, the squad car, and the man being driven away, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. I was just old enough to be left home alone, still in that in-between age of independence, but not quite grown. We lived in a small court tucked inside a lower middle-class neighborhood, in a quiet little town that hadn't yet exploded into what it is today. Back then, we had one grocery store in the middle of town and a whole lot of peace. It was the kind of place where kids played outside all day, from morning until long after the sun went down, and nobody really worried too much. Our court was shaped like a big U, with only 8 houses lining it. There was one way in, one way out. I lived right near the curve of the U, and my best friend Ashley lived directly across the street. We were just a few houses away from the entrance, but traffic was almost non-existent. Only neighbors came through. It was one of those dead zones where, unless you lived there, you had no reason to pass by. The roads around gave better access to nearby homes, so our little court was basically invisible to the rest of the town. Ashley's parents weren't exactly social. They didn't like people coming over, so we always hung out at my place or played outside in the court. That part becomes important later. It was Halloween night, and I had decided to stay home that year to go trick-or-treating around our neighborhood with Ashley. The sun had long set, and the streets were completely silent now. Most of the kids had already gone home with their pillowcases full of candy. My family had headed off to a wealthier neighborhood where you could score those glorious king-sized bars, and afterward they were going to a friend's house. They told me they might be back late, or maybe not until morning. I wasn't interested in tagging along with my younger siblings and their crew. I just wanted to hang out with Ashley. So I begged my mom to let me stay behind, promising I'd lock the door the second she left, and she agreed. By now, it was getting close to 10 or 11 p.m. Ashley and I were sitting on the curb in front of my house, just chatting. That's what we did at that age, just talk about everything and soak up the night. Then we noticed this man. He walked past the entrance of our court and slowed down when he saw us. He stared for a second, just long enough to make it uncomfortable, then kept moving. Something about him felt off. I didn't recognize him, and in our small town, you knew everybody, or at least you recognized their face. He was a stocky white guy with a beer belly, wearing a tan jacket, dark jeans, and heavy work boots. Under the streetlights, I could see him clearly enough to know he wasn't from around here. Ashley leaned in and asked if I knew him. I shook my head no. We tried to go back to our conversation, but she kept glancing toward the court's entrance. He's walking by again, she said. And again, and again. This guy didn't look like someone out for a late-night jog or stroll. He was dressed more like he was heading to work. Definitely not for a 5-lap loop around a dead-end street. But we were kids. We brushed it off until the 5th time. Hey, that guy passed again, Ashley said, her voice uneasy. I turned my back to the street facing her, and she stopped talking. He wasn't walking this time. He was just standing there under the streetlight. Same side of the street we were on, hands stuffed awkwardly in his pockets like he was trying to look casual. But he wasn't looking around. He was just staring at me. He kept glancing around quickly like he was checking if anyone else was out, then locked eyes with me again. Something about the way he looked at me twisted my gut. He didn't look dangerous. In fact, he looked like someone's average suburban dad, but his eyes, it was his eyes. I'm creeped out. Let's go inside before he comes back, Ashley said quietly. He had disappeared again, so I walked her across the street to her house. I was always the mom friend, the one who made sure everyone got home safe. And yeah, you probably know where this is going. I jogged back to my house, ready to bolt inside. I reached for the doorknob, heart already settling, only to feel it refusing to turn. It was locked. I stood there, trying again, not breathing. That's when it hit me I didn't have a key. We never locked the door unless we were all inside for the night. This was before cell phones, too. My family had accidentally locked me out, and I had no way to reach them. My chest tightened. I was locked out, and he was still out there. I forced myself to think. The back door, the sliding glass one, that one should be unlocked too. So I stepped away from the front door, walked along the side path of the house toward the gate. That's when I froze. At the far end of the court, the man was back, standing there again. No way he walked the whole loop to end up there so fast. He'd never left. He must have faked walking away and just waited. He saw me and smiled, raised a hand like he was saying hello. Then he started walking toward me, His steps were calm, slow, like he was just out for another loop, but his eyes never left mine. I bolted. I ran as fast as I could back across the street to Ashley's house. It was the only place that felt alive, the only one that had a chance of an adult being inside. I sprinted up the stone steps, pounding on the door, slamming the doorbell over and over again. Ashley opened it, startled. I was panicked and practically pushing my way in. "I'm locked out and he's coming," I cried. I have to ask my mom." Then she shut the door. I stood there crying, staring at the door that had just closed on me. I turned around to see how close he was now. He had stopped pretending. He wasn't walking anymore. He was running straight at me, diagonal across the court, aimed right for where I was standing. I slammed my hand on the doorbell again, over and over and over, until suddenly the door swung open and Ashley yanked me inside. She slammed it shut, twisting the lock. I collapsed in tears and she held onto me tightly. We ran to the window and he was standing just outside, breathing hard, looking furious. His eyes locked onto mine and then he slowly backed away, turned and walked off down the street like nothing had happened. After that, everything's a bit of a blur. Ashley's mom finally came out and saw how shaken I was. She called the cops and I gave a statement. My parents got home not long after the officers left, and my mom hugged me like she thought she'd lost me. Turns out my 8-year-old brother had locked the door before they left because he was scared of bad guys. No one realized I wasn't inside. I didn't stay home alone again until we moved years later. And even now, I think about that night often. I still don't know what he wanted or if it was kidnapping or something worse. But whatever it was, I can't find a reason that doesn't chill me. And to this day, I still get uneasy around smiling strangers in the dark. I've always loved driving those long, aimless night drives where it's just me, my music, and the open road stretching out ahead. Living in Nebraska, I usually take back roads or quiet highways that cut through the countryside, winding past small towns and eventually the city. I prefer driving at night when the traffic's light, and for the past 4 or 5 years since I got my license, it's always been peaceful. No trouble, no scares, just the kind of solitude that helps me clear my head. But a few nights ago, that all changed. For some context, I'm a pretty small 22-year-old woman, and these solo drives have been my way to decompress when life feels overwhelming. Growing up, I used to take them to escape the toxicity of my parents' household, especially dealing with their alcoholism. Now that I'm out and in a better place mentally, I don't feel the urge to just get in my car and drive like I used to. But that night, I was feeling all kinds of stressed and anxious over a mess of personal stuff I'd rather not dive into. I was restless, irritable around my boyfriend, and totally unable to focus. So I told him I needed a drive to clear my mind. He was understanding, told me to be safe and not stay out too late, and I promised I'd be back soon. I kissed him goodbye and headed out. I drove around town for about half an hour, but the chaos in my head wouldn't let up. So I decided to head north, onto those familiar, dark, twisting, one-lane highways I knew well. I kept a steady 65 miles per hour, slowing down through the curves just in case a deer suddenly appeared. Outside, the fields were blanketed in snow. There were no other cars, no lights, but my headlights cutting through the thick darkness. The few houses nearby were dark, and the dead cornfields stretched for miles. I half expected to see a ghost flash in my rearview mirror, or someone step out of the tree line. It was just past 11 p.m., and I told myself I'd turn back once I hit the roundabout ahead that could take me back toward the city or a small town. That roundabout was still 15-25 minutes away, and aside from my imagination running wild, I wasn't really worried. I was alone, sure, but there was no one else on the road. Then, rounding a bend, I spotted a car with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter mile ahead. It was a dark sedan, pulled halfway onto the shoulder, the driver's door wide open. Like whoever was inside had to get out fast, but didn't quite make it all the way off the road. When I slowed down to pass, I saw what looked like blood smeared inside the door. No one was in or around the car, and I was still the only vehicle in sight. Cell reception here is awful, spotty at best, and often non-existent, so I checked my phone. No signal. Just me, a lone woman on a dark, deserted road, pulling up next to a car that looked like someone had been hurt, and no way to call for help. I'm no fool. I've watched enough true crime shows and read enough books to know this was a bad scene. The kind that screams danger. But a small part of me worried whoever was in that car might really need help. This road barely sees any traffic at night, and with temperatures freezing if someone was hurt, it'd be just me to find them. Still, I played it safe. I stayed in my car, rolled down my passenger window a bit, turned off the music and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" Silence. No response. I thought maybe someone was unconscious, but I wasn't about to get out and search in the dark alone. I decided to call out one more time, and if there was no answer, I'd leave and call it in once I had reception. If they answered, I'd figure it out then. I called out again, "Hey!" "What happened? Are you okay?" After a moment of quiet, I heard rustling in the trees nearby. Then a low, rough voice muttered, "Yeah." Relief flooded me, and I was about to say something back or even stop my car when I noticed three things at once. First, as I edged past the front of the sedan, I realized the hood and the rest of the car showed no signs of damage, which is strange, given the blood inside the door. Second, in my rearview mirror, I caught someone emerging quickly from behind the car, moving straight toward me. Third, this person was wearing a mask, not a normal face mask, but one of those creepy full face masks you'd see in a Purge movie. They were holding something long and hard in their hand, maybe a crowbar or tire iron, but I couldn't tell for sure. That was my cue. I slammed my foot on the gas and bolted. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The window was still down and the music off, so I could clearly hear the man yelling at me, but I didn't catch a word. All I knew was I had to get away fast. I stole a glance in the mirror as I sped off, curious if they'd chase me. The man with the weapon was still standing in the road, staring after me. Then, just before I looked away, a second masked man appeared from the trees, also blood-free and silently watching. I probably broke every speed limit that night, but nothing mattered except putting distance between me and those guys. When I hit the roundabout, I turned back toward town and pulled into a Walmart parking lot, where a few workers were still around closing up. That's where I lost it, shaking and crying. After I calmed down a bit, I called a friend who's a cop. He was worried, asked if I was okay, if they followed me, and told me he'd try to get the local sheriff involved since it was outside his jurisdiction. While waiting for the police, I called my boyfriend, and through tears and panic, I told him everything. He was terrified for me and wanted me to come home right away or he'd come get me. I told him the cops were on their way to take my statement and that I was okay, but stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar flashing lights pull in. The police took my statement and promised to check out the spot I described, though with no cameras and just a vague description of a dark sedan and two masked men, I wasn't sure what good it would do. I didn't even get the license plate as I was too shaken to think about that until they asked. All they had to go on was the car and two scary guys in masks. Afterward, I went home and stayed glued to my boyfriend, every noise in the house making me jump. Terrified those men might come back. I haven't heard from the police since, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I'm just grateful I'm safe, that I didn't stop, and that I got away. I still wonder about so many things. What were those men doing out there? Was that blood real or some sick trick? Did they hurt someone else? What would have happened if I had stopped? One thing's for sure, no more late night drives for me, and I hope I never run into those freaks again. This happened when I was 6 years old. I was a very timid girl back then, and the events that transpired that day have stuck with me ever since. I was staying over at a friend's house one Saturday afternoon, and we were both sitting on the couch watching cartoons. For the sake of this story, we'll call my friend Kate. Kate was 2 years older than me and could best be described as a tomboy. Unlike me, she was tough and didn't hesitate to beat up any boy at school for saying mean things behind her back. At the time, I had a tendency to do whatever Kate told me to, even if I didn't want to do it. Anyways, after watching cartoons for a while, I got hungry, so I left the couch and went into the kitchen to grab a snack. The kitchen was small and had a door which led straight to the backyard, and below it was a little doggy door. Kate no longer had a dog, but the door wasn't removed for some reason. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen doorway, my eyes zeroed in on the doggy door and I froze. To my absolute horror, a grown man with long brown hair was poking his head inside. I couldn't see his face, just the top of his head as he was looking up at the doorknob, probably trying to see if he could reach it. I quickly and quietly ran around the corner to hide. Thankfully, he didn't see me as he was much too busy trying to squeeze his arm through the door. Kate's parents were out shopping at the time, so we were both home alone with this guy trying to break in. And it was here that I made my first mistake. Instead of calling the police, I ran back into the living room, where Kate was, and told her about the man. She thought I was joking, so I grabbed her by the hand and pulled her off the couch, then led her back to the kitchen so she could see the man for herself. Sure enough, he was still there. His face was still obscured as he was looking up at the doorknob, but this time he had his whole arm inside the doggy door and tried reaching for the knob. Kate let out a soft whimper before quickly putting her hand over her mouth. It was the first time I saw her look so scared. But when she looked back at me, her fear seemingly went away. She then placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and put her finger to her lips to keep me quiet. "Don't worry. We're gonna teach that creep a lesson he won't ever forget," she said with a smug grin. I wasn't sure what she was planning. We were two scrawny little girls dressed in tank tops and shorts. Not exactly the picture of intimidation. But like an idiot, I agreed to go along with whatever she was up to. "Okay," I said. "Great, we're gonna have to sneak up on this guy, so do what I do and follow me. And be quiet," she said, before walking into the kitchen, with me close behind. Even though we tried our best to be stealthy, our feet were squeaking loudly across the floor with every step we took. Kate's mom must have cleaned the floor recently, and since Kate and I were both barefoot, the squeaking was twice as loud. We stopped and looked at each other nervously for a moment, thinking we were done for, but fortunately the man's constant fumbling with the locked door blocked out the squeaks we made. So by sheer dumb luck, he wasn't alerted of our presence, even though our footsteps were as loud as a freight train. My heart raced as we continued walking, getting closer and closer to the intruder. The man hadn't noticed us yet, but he yanked his head and arm out after seemingly giving up on reaching the knob. Kate sighed in disappointment, but figured he'd be back to try again. She then sat down in front of the doggy door and I sat beside her. "As soon as he pokes his head in, we're gonna kick him as hard as we can," Kate snickered, as she raised both of her bare feet off the floor and bent her knees back, preparing them for the kick. I did the same, and we both just stayed in that position, waiting for the man to return. No more than 20 seconds passed before the doggy door flapped open again, and the man popped his head in, this time, giving us a good look at his face. But we didn't kick. We just sat there, frozen, eyes wide with fear as we tried to comprehend what we were looking at. That is not a face we were expecting to see. The man himself was also surprised when he saw us for the first time. He glanced between the two of us, completely speechless. And why wouldn't he be? He wasn't expecting to find two little girls waiting for him on the other side of the door with their bare feet raised in the air ready to strike, mere inches from his face. The entire situation was so surreal. After a minute of awkward silence as we just looked at each other, the man finally smiled at us. And when he did, my friend and I began to quake in fear. As if this guy couldn't get any weirder, his mouth was full of razor-sharp teeth, almost as if he were a monster straight out of a horror movie. Then, without warning, he lunged his head forward, mouth wide open like he was ready to bite. And given our current sitting positions, our feet were well within biting distance. Kate and I screamed as we fell flat on our backs, yanking our feet away from the man's teeth just as they snapped shut. He missed us by mere centimeters, and we weren't about to stick around so he could try again. I quickly scrambled to my feet and bolted out the kitchen. Kate, however, took a little longer to get up, and the man was able to grab her ankle, making her fall to the floor. Looking over my shoulder, I could see Kate screaming as she was being dragged towards the man, who once again had his mouth open, ready to take a bite. Kate started kicking the man's face with her other foot, making him let go for a moment, only to then grab both of her feet at the same time. Kate was sobbing like a baby at this point. She tossed and turned, trying to free herself, but the man's grip was too strong. He laughed as he started gnashing his teeth next to her toes, inching closer and closer just to pull away at the last second and try again. It wasn't bad enough that he was trying to hurt us, but the sick freak also took pleasure in scaring the hell out of us. That must have got my blood boiling because I raced back into the kitchen, grabbed a few apples that were sitting on a table, and started throwing them at the man. The man groaned in annoyance as he let my friend go and scrambled out of the doggy door. We could hear his frantic footsteps fading away as he finally left our house. I guess he didn't think breaking in was worth getting pelted by apples. We never told Kate's parents what happened. I mean, what would we even tell them? A man with no skin on his face and a mouthful of sharp teeth tried to break in and nearly bit off our toes? Her parents would think we were crazy. I don't know if that guy was ever caught, but I hope he never tries this with anyone else. I'll probably never forget that face for as long as I live. I used to live in a pretty nice area with my husband and some family friends. We'd been there for a few years and nothing bad had ever really happened. It felt like a safe neighborhood. For context, I'm a very short white woman, and although I look fine on the outside, I'm considered disabled. My condition severely limits my activity, so defending myself physically has never been an option. This happened about a year before we moved. Around that time, I started seeing stories pop up on Facebook about traffickers targeting women and children at a local store, and the very store we lived right behind. The reports freaked me out, and I decided I wouldn't go there alone anymore. I kept seeing news articles about people being followed, grabbed, even kidnapped from that store, but I figured I'd be fine as long as my husband was with me. One afternoon, I was heading to work about 15 minutes away, out in the middle of nowhere. I worked the late shift at a call center surrounded by open fields, and I was usually one of the last people to leave at night. That day, I needed to stop for gas. I didn't like going anywhere without my husband, but I didn't have enough fuel to make it to work and back, so I had no choice. When I pulled into the station, I felt a little better seeing it was busy. I got out and started pumping gas when a big van pulled up beside me. A man stepped out, started pumping his gas, then walked around the pump and positioned himself between me and my car. He smiled and said, "Wow, your car is so clean. How do you get it so clean?" I was completely thrown off as my car was actually a mess covered in dirt and bugs. Then he said, "Why don't you show me how you get it so clean?" and reached out toward me. I jerked back instantly. Just then, another car pulled up behind me, and the man seemed startled. He walked back to his van. I quickly finished pumping, got into my car, locked the doors, and sped off. A few minutes later, I checked my mirror and the same van was right behind me, practically on my bumper. I could see the man laughing and talking to another guy inside. I told myself maybe they were just headed for the freeway, but when we passed the on-ramp, they stayed behind me. My heart was pounding. The only thing down this road was my work. I called my husband, but he didn't answer as he was at work too, so I just pressed the gas and headed for my job, checking my mirror every few seconds. When I finally reached the large parking lot, I pulled straight into a handicapped spot right in front of the doors and ran inside. Through the locked doors, I saw the van idling out front, the man looking visibly irritated. I went straight to a friend in my department who was ex-military and always armed. I was shaking as I told him what happened. That night when we closed, I peeked out the window before heading to my car. But it had moved by the time I told my friend. Now it was parked right behind my car. My friend pulled out his gun, walked me outside, and escorted me to his car. He drove me right up to my vehicle, then followed me home and stayed outside until I was safely inside. I noticed the van following us until we reached the freeway where it finally turned off. The next day on my way to work, I passed the gas station and just like before, the van pulled out and started following me. They tailed me all the way to the lot before turning away. This happened for about a week. They'd follow me to work, disappear, then reappear at closing time. My friend thought they were trying to figure out my schedule, waiting for the perfect time to grab me. He even offered me one of his guns just in case, but I refused, as I didn't want to risk legal trouble since it wasn't in my name. One night, I told my husband again about the van, and he suggested calling the police. I honestly don't know why I hadn't thought of it sooner. The next morning, before work, I called and explained everything. That day, right on cue, the van pulled out behind me. We were on that long, empty stretch of road when I spotted a car parked on the shoulder. I passed it, and then the van passed it as well, and suddenly, lights flashed. The police pulled the van over. Later, I found out both men inside had multiple warrants for rape and attempted kidnapping. In the back of the van, police found knives, rope, gloves, masks, chloroform, and other terrifying things. They told me I was likely their next target. Ironically, that day my friend wasn't at work as he was homesick. I'm so thankful I called the cops when I did. If I hadn't, I truly don't think I would have made it home. We've since moved to a less nice area, but I haven't noticed anyone creepy around, and now I always carry pepper spray when I go out. This was around 1980 when I was in my early 20s. I had a date and we decided to head to the Sail Inn in West Sacramento to shoot some pool. We'd been there before and always enjoyed chatting with the bartender. I can't recall her name now, but she was beautiful. That night as we walked in, we saw the pool table was already taken. A man and woman were in the middle of a game, so I stood nearby watching while my date went to grab us some drinks. A few minutes passed and the man noticed me and struck up a casual conversation. When my date returned with our drinks, the guy asked if we wanted to join them for a game. I remember not thinking much of it at the time, even though the woman with him hadn't said a single word. We agreed, and he racked up the balls for a game and the four of us paired off. At some point during the game, we all introduced ourselves, and right after that, the man began asking me a series of personal questions like, where did I live? Had my date and I been together long? Did we live together? His questions were invasive, and the tone felt off. I started to notice the man and the woman started exchanging glances. I couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine, even though on the surface, everything else seemed normal, and yet the woman still hadn't spoken a word. After we finished the game, the man asked if we wanted to head to another bar down the street with them. I hesitated, then he asked again, saying they'd just found a cool new spot nearby. My date and I looked at each other, and before he could speak, I blurted out, "No thanks, we have dinner plans." That wasn't true, but I could feel something was wrong. My date didn't argue, as he must have seen the panic on my face. We grabbed our jackets and left. By the time we got outside, the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. Back in my truck, my date turned to me and asked what was going on. I told him I had a terrible feeling and something about those people wasn't right. I said it was weird the guy invited us to leave with them without even checking with his date. My date just shrugged and said okay. I think he thought I was being dramatic. A few days later, I was home and picked up the afternoon paper. There was an article about a woman in West Sacramento who had been found murdered. At first, I didn't think anything of it until I flipped to the continuation of the article, and the photo practically leapt off the page. It was her, the beautiful bartender from the Sail Inn. The article said she'd been kidnapped, raped, and murdered the very night we'd been there. I was completely creeped out. What a horrible way to die, and what a chilling coincidence. But it wasn't until a month later that the full weight of that night hit me. A man and woman had just been arrested for the bartender's murder, along with several others. They had killed multiple people, with 4 of their victims being couples. There on the front page of the Sacramento Bee were their photos. Gerald and Charlene Gallego, who was the same couple who invited my date and I to go with them to another bar. Apparently that was one of their ruses, luring people to their van. As I stared at their faces, my heart pounded. Not only had we been targeted, but we were supposed to be next. It also seems when we turned them down, they found someone else. Because of me. I've carried both relief and guilt ever since, even though I know intellectually that the bartender's death isn't my fault. But I can't help but wonder how different things might have been if she had lived, even if it meant I hadn't. Needless to say, that was the last bar date I went on, for a very long time. So, about 6 years ago, I was with my friend Tom, and we were staying at my parents' cabin. One night, we decided to hit up a casino about 40 minutes away that was deep in an Ojibwe reserve. The highway that leads there is surrounded by dense forest, no lights. Nothing but pitch-black darkness once the sun goes down. The night went pretty well as we played some poker, tried our luck at a few table games, and even grabbed dinner with our winnings. Around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a night. Honestly, I kind of wished we'd left earlier since driving that highway in the dark is no joke. Anyways, we were about 20 minutes into the drive back and we hadn't passed a single car. But then I saw 2 glowing green orbs just off the road near a hill. I realized it was a deer, so I slammed on the brakes and waited. A few of them crossed in front of us, and once they were gone, we kept driving. We were slowly climbing the hill because of the stop, and right as we hit the crest, Tom suddenly screamed, "Holy shit!" That's when I saw her. This young woman was walking straight toward us in the middle of our lane, no more than 30 feet away. I slammed the brakes again and stopped about 10 feet from her. But the scariest part wasn't that I almost hit someone. It was what she looked like. She had long black hair, was barefoot, and was wearing this flowing white nightgown. Her face was blank, completely expressionless, and she just kept walking toward us. We just sat there for a moment, frozen. I expected her to come to the window or say something. Instead, she slowly walked to the front of the car, passed by my side, and dragged her hand along the driver's side door as she continued walking into the night. Tom was freaking out, and honestly, I was too. But something didn't feel right about just driving off. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her still walking, slowly down the hill. I told Tom I was going to check on her to make sure she was okay. He practically begged me not to and said we should just go, but I felt like I had to do something. So I threw on the blinkers, left the door open to shine some light, and stepped out. I walked around to the back of the car. Between the weak interior light and the hazard lights flashing, I could barely make her out. She was maybe 20 or 30 feet away now, just this faint figure in the darkness. I called out, "Are you all right?" She didn't turn around, just stood there facing away from me. I started to get this feeling in my gut like something was seriously off. That's when I heard Tom's door open as he was getting out to back me up. And then she started screaming. It wasn't just a normal scream, it was loud, long, and blood-curdling. We bolted back to the car, jumped in, and I floored it out of there. Tom let me have it the entire ride home, saying I was crazy for even getting out. To this day, I haven't seen anything like that again on that highway, and I'm honestly grateful. Right after high school, my life took a turn I never saw coming. My guardian kicked me out the day I graduated with no warning, no support. Just gone. With nowhere to go, I ended up living in my car for a couple of months, scraping by trying to figure out what came next. Then I met some heavy metal guys at work. I'd seen them around before, and everyone in town seemed to know and love them. Over time, we clicked and they offered me a place to stay. I thought I'd caught a break, but looking back, I wish I had stayed in that car. My main roommates were two brothers, Andrew and Seth. They were in a band and heavily into occult beliefs, rituals, and symbols, all of it. I didn't really believe in that stuff, but they weren't hurting anyone and they were letting me live there rent-free. As the only girl in a house full of guys, I stayed on guard because you never really know who you can trust. Turns out, my gut was right. Eventually, more of their friends started crashing at the place. There were 5 brothers they went to school with, though only 2 of them stayed with us regularly. The younger one, Mark, was respectful and helpful. He pulled his weight and kept quiet. The older one, Adam, was different. He was a little off. He had a long history of mental illness, supposedly from doing hard drugs that messed up his mind. He'd even served time for attacking a woman with a Bible. That's the kind of man we were sharing a roof with. Adam would sometimes stare you straight in the eyes and tell you how you were going to die. Once, he told me I was possessed and needed to have my soul cleansed. Everyone knew he was unstable, but no one took it seriously. They said he was just troubled and they were helping him stay off the streets. I never felt safe around him, and I never let my guard down. One afternoon, I was asleep when my phone rang. It was my boss asking if I could come in early. I had nothing else going on and needed the money, so I said yes. I got up, got dressed, and walked out into the living room. Mark and Andrew were on the couch. Adam sat on the floor, eyes glued to the TV, watching apocalyptic scripture videos on YouTube. Just another weird morning in that house. I said goodbye and headed to work. Hours later, near the end of my shift, the store phone rang. My boss picked it up, then handed it to me and said, "It's for you." I was just a cashier, so no one ever called me there. I took the phone and heard a calm, unfamiliar voice. "This is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come in and talk." I left immediately. I figured someone had been arrested, maybe for drugs, but I couldn't have been more wrong. At the station, I was led into a cold interview room and left alone for what felt like forever. My mind raced with possibilities. Finally, the detective came back and sat across from me. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Adam stabbed and killed Andrew around 1 p.m. today." I couldn't speak. I had left just an hour before it happened, and everything had seemed normal. I asked if there had been a fight, but the detective shook his head. No argument, no warning, just violence. I gave my statement in a daze, then left with nowhere to go. Our apartment was now a crime scene. I crashed at a friend's place and turned on the news, hoping to understand what had happened. The next few days unraveled like a nightmare. The reports were more gruesome than I could have imagined. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew, he mutilated him with dozens of stab wounds, nearly decapitated. Then afterwards, he ran down the street with the weapon still in his hand and called 911. He confessed everything, not just to the murder, but to a plan to kill all of us, every roommate, every friend, including me. He believed we were possessed by demons, and this was the only way to save us. He even handed over notebooks filled with his twisted thoughts and intentions. Turns out, I was supposed to be next. The only reason I wasn't home when it happened was because of that last-minute call from my boss, which means that one shift saved my life. Mark had witnessed the entire thing, but he was lucky to escape. None of us ever imagined it would go this far, but the signs had been there all along. We just didn't want to believe them.